For decades, the United States and Canada have been known as the closest allies in the Western world, sharing the longest peaceful border on the planet, trading hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and coordinating defense through NATO and NORAD. But what happens when political rhetoric suddenly pushes that relationship into uncomfortable territory? Recently, statements linked to Donald Trump sparked a wave of reactions that made analysts wonder whether one of the strongest alliances in modern history could face unexpected tension. Before we go further, I want to invite you into something simple. If you're watching from Malaysia or anywhere else in the world, write the name of your country in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how global stories connect people from different places, and discussions like this remind us that international politics affects everyone, not just the countries directly involved. Assalamu alaikum, let's break down what's really going on. To understand why this situation even became a headline, you have to step back and look at the relationship between the United States and Canada. These two countries share more than an 8,800-kilometer border, the longest international border in the world. Every single day, goods worth roughly $2 billion cross that border. That means factories, farms, technology companies, and transportation networks in both countries depend on each other constantly. Think about that for a second. When you buy a car in North America, parts of that vehicle may cross the US-Canada border multiple times before the final assembly is completed. Steel might come from one side, electronics from the other, and engines from a completely different location. That level of integration means political tensions can quickly become economic problems if leaders are not careful. Now here's where Donald Trump enters the story. During his presidency, Trump often criticized trade agreements involving Canada, particularly the North American Free Trade Agreement, commonly known as NAFTA. He argued that the deal was unfair to American workers and pushed aggressively for renegotiation. Those negotiations eventually produced a new agreement in 2020 called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. The new deal updated rules around automotive production, labor standards, and digital trade. While the agreement was ultimately supported by both countries, the negotiation process itself revealed how tense trade discussions could become. But trade disputes were only one part of the story. Trump also made strong comments about defense spending within NATO, repeatedly arguing that allies needed to contribute more to their own security. Canada, like several other NATO members, has faced pressure for years to increase its military spending toward the alliance's target of 2% of national GDP. Now pause and think about why defense spending even matters here. Canada and the United States jointly operate the North American Aerospace Defense Command, better known as NORAD. This system monitors the skies over North America for potential threats, including missiles or unauthorized aircraft. It's one of the most important defense partnerships in the world. When political rhetoric starts questioning alliances or commitments, defense planners naturally pay attention. Military leaders always consider worst-case scenarios, even if they seem unlikely. That doesn't mean panic in the literal sense, but it does mean strategic discussions about readiness and cooperation. Now imagine you are a defense analyst watching political debates between two countries that have worked together for generations. You would immediately start asking questions. Could trade disagreements spill into security discussions? Would military coordination remain unaffected? Or would the political tension remain purely rhetorical? These questions are not theoretical. Over the past decade, several disputes between the United States and Canada have captured global attention. One of the most prominent involved tariffs on steel and aluminum. In 2018, the U.S. government imposed tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum imports from multiple countries, including Canada. Canada responded with its own counter-tariffs on American goods. The result was a temporary trade conflict between two of the world's closest partners. Businesses on both sides of the border felt the pressure, particularly manufacturers that rely on metals for production. This moment showed how quickly economic policies can ripple through industries. A steel tariff might sound technical, but when companies suddenly face higher costs, they have to decide whether to absorb those costs, raise prices, or reduce production. Now let's bring the focus back to the broader geopolitical picture. Canada is not just a neighbor of the United States. It is also one of Washington's most reliable allies in global security operations. Canadian forces have participated in NATO missions, peacekeeping efforts, and international coalitions alongside American troops for decades. During the war in Afghanistan, for example, Canadian forces were heavily involved in operations alongside U.S. and NATO partners. More than 40,000 Canadian military personnel served during that mission, demonstrating the depth of cooperation between the two countries. So when political statements create friction, analysts naturally compare rhetoric with historical cooperation. On one side, you have decades of partnership and shared strategy. On the other side, you have moments of political disagreement that generate dramatic headlines. Here's where the story becomes interesting from a global perspective. Political rhetoric often sounds more dramatic than the underlying policy reality. Leaders sometimes use strong language during negotiations to gain leverage, but behind the scenes, diplomats and defense officials continue working together. Think of it like a high-stakes business negotiation. Two partners may publicly argue about the terms of a contract, but both sides still recognize that the partnership itself remains valuable. And that is exactly what many experts believe about the U.S.-Canada relationship. Despite occasional disputes over trade, defense spending, or political messaging, the structural ties between the two countries remain extremely strong. For example, Canada remains the largest export market for the United States. In many American states, Canada is actually the #1 destination for goods produced locally. From agriculture to machinery to energy products, the economic connections are enormous. Meanwhile, Canada relies heavily on the United States for trade as well. Roughly 3/4 of Canadian exports go south across the border. That level of dependence encourages cooperation, even when political leaders disagree. Now let's shift perspective for a moment and think about how this story looks from outside North America. For viewers in Malaysia or Southeast Asia, the situation illustrates an important lesson about international politics. Even the closest allies can experience moments of tension. Trade disputes happen. Political leaders exchange sharp words. Negotiations become difficult. But the strength of a relationship often depends on the institutions and agreements that exist beyond individual leaders. In the case of the United States and Canada, those institutions include trade agreements, military alliances, intelligence sharing, and decades of diplomatic coordination. These structures create stability even when political debates become heated. That brings us to the question that sparked the dramatic headlines in the first place. Did Trump truly cross a line that could damage the alliance with Canada, or are these reactions simply part of the political cycle? Many analysts lean toward the second explanation. They point out that disagreements between allied nations are not new. In fact, some of the most successful alliances in history have experienced internal debates while still maintaining overall cooperation. Consider the European Union, where member states frequently argue about trade rules, immigration policies, and economic strategy. Yet despite these disagreements, the overall framework of cooperation continues to function. The same logic applies to North America. Political rhetoric may intensify during election cycles or policy debates, but the underlying economic and security partnerships remain deeply rooted. And here's something fascinating that often surprises people. The U.S.-Canada border is one of the most efficient trade corridors in the world. Thousands of trucks cross the border every day, carrying goods ranging from fresh produce to advanced technology components. Every time one of those trucks crosses the border, it represents jobs, supply chains, and economic connections that benefit both countries. That constant flow of commerce creates powerful incentives for leaders to maintain stable relations. As we move toward the conclusion of this discussion, let's return to the big picture. Dramatic headlines can make political disagreements sound like historic turning points, but when you examine the deeper context, you often see a more complex reality. The relationship between the United States and Canada is built on trade worth hundreds of billions of dollars, shared defense responsibilities, and decades of cooperation in international affairs. Those foundations do not disappear because of a few political statements or policy disputes. At the same time, these moments remind us how important diplomacy and communication are in maintaining strong alliances. Even friendly nations must constantly manage disagreements carefully to avoid unnecessary escalation. So what are the key takeaways from this story? First, the United States and Canada remain among the closest allies in the world, connected by trade, defense, and geography. Second, Political rhetoric and trade disputes can create tension, but they rarely overturn decades of institutional cooperation. And third, understanding the deeper context behind global headlines helps you see the difference between short-term drama and long-term geopolitical reality. If this breakdown helped you understand the situation more clearly, consider liking the video and subscribing so you can follow more global stories explained in simple, clear language. And now I want to hear from you. Do you think strong rhetoric during negotiations is a useful strategy, or does it risk damaging important alliances? Share your thoughts in the comments, because conversations like this help all of us see international politics from multiple perspectives.